And now we will start our first session, and I will give the floor to Mark de Mesmaeker.
Thank you, and I would invite the Minister. And Ivana. Mr. Koopman. So as you have seen, we have three eminent speakers on their way to the desk here. Ms. Hajar Labib, our Foreign Affairs Minister, Ms. Ivana Klimpuch, who is chair of the Ukraine's integration into the European Union Committee of the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian Parliament, and Mr. Gert-Jan Koopman, who is Director General for Neighbourhood and Enlargement Negotiations of the European Commission. Welcome. Let me start by explaining how this debate will be organized. Our speakers will give their keynote speech to the subject from their respective point of view. And in the meantime, and as from now, in fact, you can request to take the floor afterwards by following the instruction sheet you have found on your table. Remember that to request the floor, you simply need to press the button once. The light on your microphone will turn green. If you push the button a second time, you remove your name from the list of speakers. So remember that. The order of speakers will be that of the registration, first come, first served, apart from little alterations. The speakers' order will be displayed on the screens during the debate. You already see it. The name displayed is that of the speaker's seat, best friends. So please sit on your assigned seat, not in anyone else's. Interventions are made also from your seat. And we will not allow interventions to exceed 90 seconds, so a minute and a half to give everybody the chance to take the floor. The remaining speaking time will be displayed on the screens. Ladies and gentlemen, Els and David and Stephanie have already provided an overview of the context also of this debate in their opening remarks. It's been 10 years since Russia initiated its aggression against Ukraine, starting in Crimea and Donbass, and 2 years since the full-scale war. We're all too familiar with the progression of this conflict, and indeed, a number of colleagues here in this room traveled to Ukraine last week. And as an introduction, just allow me to add a couple of thoughts and observations from my part. After 2 years of war, there is a sense of fatigue. Ukrainians are exhausted, but they remain as resolute as ever in defending their nation against Russian aggression, simply because they are left with no alternative. The situation is dire and the combat intensely fierce, exacerbated by a critical shortage of ammunition and the right weapon systems. Any delay or hesitance in our support translates directly to loss of lives, both on the front lines and in their cities still under attack. Yet they have no choice, because they are well aware of what succumbing to the Ruski Mir, the Russian world, entails. And over the last 2 years, I visited various regions, Ivana knows, including those liberated and deoccupied, initially around Kyiv, later Kherson, Mykolaiv. The Ruski Mir looks like this, ladies and gentlemen. It's mass graves filled with murdered civilians, torture chambers, decimated villages, destroyed schools, hospitals, looted businesses, mine-laden fields, ecocide, and the people who bear the scars of torture, persecution, the abduction of their children. This is why they remain steadfast in their commitment to defend their country and our shared values, and why they are determined to liberate all their territory and their people. I've witnessed myself that our defense systems in their city make a difference. They save lives, a lot of lives. However, drones, cruise missiles, and hypersonic missiles sometimes breach the defenses, causing catastrophic damage to civilian areas, as we have seen in Odessa just recently. Indeed, the situation is grim, and Putin's gamble is that his patience will outlast our patience, believing Russia is more committed to the conflict than we are. It's already becoming evident in the challenges faced in the US Congress and in some capitals. A final thought. Putin seems willing to sacrifice thousands more of his men without a second thought. He will not blink. Meanwhile, we sit on $300 billion of his frozen assets. Losing this money would significantly impact him, especially if it were used by Ukraine, if it were to be transferred to Ukraine to use it to fight back. But let's now jump in with a contribution of Ms. Hajjal Habib, our Foreign Affairs Minister. Ms. Minister.
Thank you, Mark de Meersmaker. Dear parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, dear all, just let me say first of all that I will speak both French and English, so you can maybe prepare your headset if you need translation. Even if we are here to discuss very important and urgent issues, I hope you will have, or you had the chance to visit this historic city of Bruges, the Venice of the North, as we said, with its cobblestone streets, canals, and swans. And talking about these swans, we can start maybe by plunging into a legend back in the 15th century, an anecdote that is particularly relevant as we discuss resilience and freedom. Legend has it that Maximilian of Austria, who once ruled this city, was imprisoned by the city's resident. And to make a long story short, let's say that these citizens were avid for freedom and autonomy. In retaliation, Maximilian of Austria transformed the swans of his coat of arms, symbol of the city's wealth, into hundreds of real swans, and he condemned the inhabitants to take care of them for eternity. True or not, these elegant birds serve as a reminder of Bruges' rich history and its people's loves of freedom and autonomy. And this very love for freedom is what the Ukrainian people have demonstrated over the last 2 years. When we, as politicians, discuss the war, our conversations often revolve around strategies, around negotiations, attack plans, and numbers. However, the true narrative of war is about the people living daily under its shadow. It's about those residing in villages and cities marked by the scars of conflict. It's about men, women, and children for whom the threat of war has seeped under their skin. To begin, I believe it's crucial, before anything else, to remember that this war and this horrific violence affect the lives of millions of Ukrainians. Allow me to share the last experience I had with Ukrainians. Last week, I sat down with a group of Ukrainian women and their children who are in exile here in Belgium. I listened to their stories, stories full of resilience, of courage in face of war, of courage and hope amidst despair. stories of escaping during the night, stories that still make them trembling and cry. But at the end of our encountering, they loaned me a traditional Ukrainian songs, a songs of liberty which they've translated into Flemish and French. So they sing it third time with enthusiasm, with joy, and even at the end, we laughed a lot. It was, once again, a lesson of resilience and adaptation. And all that was only a confirmation also of our long, strong ties and our will to stay side by side with the Ukrainian people until their victory. Je me souviens encore de l'effroi que les premières frappes russes sur l'Ukraine a semé sur tout le continent européen. L'effroi, mais aussi la formidable unité des Européens. Nos États, nos populations ont fait front pour soutenir les Ukrainiens et la population ukrainienne. Et depuis lors, ce soutien est une priorité de notre politique de sécurité et de défense commune. C'est précisément cette unité que la Russie cherche constamment à saboter, à travers une manipulation quotidienne sur les réseaux sociaux et dans les médias, mais aussi via des infiltrations dans les cercles de décision. La Russie poursuit un but précis, semer le chaos par la division, la désinformation et la discorde, nuire à nos intérêts et à nous détourner de nos valeurs. Un jour, on nous parle de prétendus laboratoires américains établis en Ukraine. Un autre, on agite la menace de l'extension du conflit, y compris d'ailleurs par une rhétorique nucléaire irresponsable. Un autre jour encore, on agite la menace que représenterait, I see some people who are raising their hands, maybe you don't, sorry?
What is wrong? 1212, can you hear me? Is the translation working now? One two one two one two. Is it working? I'm going to say a few words in French just to check whether the translation.
Yes, I say with them.
See? And sometimes the Russians are threatening us with a collapse of Ukrainian economics, which would be detrimental to the EU. Russia has tried on and on again to use energy and food security as levers to bring pressure to bear upon us, upon Africa, triggering more inflation for EU and African citizens. Moscow and their henchmen want us to believe that it would be more reasonable to leave Ukrainians to their fateful destiny. The recent polls demonstrate that those lies, this disinformation trickles down through our societies and serve the revisionist policies of the Kremlin. We are in a run-up to general elections in Belgium and other elections in Belgium. In those times, pre-elections, we need to be aware of this threat. It is all the more essential because we need to take into account a possible review of the US international policies. More than ever, Ukraine needs us to be united and to show solidarity. Let us not become the instruments of a dictatorship that games with our uncertainties, our fears, and our divisions, because nothing would be more detrimental to our safety, to our interest, and to our values and principles. The cost of a victory of Russia will have deep and far-reaching consequences on our societies built on democratic values, starting with those liberties, those freedoms, and those rights we fought so hard to acquire. The Russian power strives on our weaknesses and would like to make the most of our weaknesses. more than ever at the direct borders of the EU, only 2,000 kilometers away. We need to reduce to the max this risk while supporting Ukraine right here, right now, meet their expectations, their economic, political and military expectation. By the end of 2023 in Belgium, we set up a 1.7 billion Euro fund to support Ukraine, and no later than on the 28th of February, we decided to act rapidly when releasing 200 million euros to buy commonly ammunition with some of our partners so that we can provide Ukraine with the means of defending itself as of right. More than 2 years after the start of this war, another risk that is looming over us, and you said so, Mark, that is fatigue, exhaustion, this feeling that this war would never end. This is a narrative that Russia is trying to spread in our minds. On the front line, the situation is dire for the Ukrainians, which needs to reinforce our determination to make the most, to put a rapid end to this war. Earlier in February, the 27 of us adopted the Facility for Ukraine. This is an EU fund earmarked with 50 billion euros and destined to help the Ukraine consolidate its state, its economy and its resilience. 10 days ago, we adopted a sanction package number 13, actually, with the aim of reducing the capacity of Russia to wage this aggressive war. Since the beginning of the war, more than 2,000 people and entities have been blacklisted in EU and are the target of EU sanctions. We'll keep on applying those sanctions and try and limit to the maximum the possibilities to circumvent those sanctions through third countries. It is essential, and this as soon as possible, to reach at EU level an agreement that will finalize the arrangements of the assistance funds created within the European peace facility so that we guarantee efficient, reliable, long-term EU military support. This is an urgent need from the Ukraine, and the Belgian presidency is working relentlessly to have this agreement signed up as rapidly as possible. Reinforcing our defense industry is a blatant necessity to help out the Ukraine, but also to boost our own defense possibilities in the EU and as a European partner within NATO. Any war will come to an end at the negotiating table. In the face of Russia's refusal to make any compromise, our priority remains to bring Ukraine to this negotiating table, but stronger than ever. Beyond all the actions I've just mentioned, we'll keep on supporting President Zelensky's peace plan, which is the only acceptable basis for a sustained and fair peace. We will keep on reaching out diplomatically to all our partners when we conduct missions abroad so that we can unite as many people as possible to this initiative. In Davos at the World Economic Forum, more than 80 countries attended a session dedicated to the Ukrainian peace plan. Ladies and gentlemen, we are entering the third year of war. But let us remember, and others said this before me, a defeat in the Ukraine would also be a defeat for Europe, because the war waged by the Ukrainians to defend themselves is a fair combat, defending our European values and our European ideals. It's about our generation and the next generations. We need to stand united more than ever, more resolute than ever. And I sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, hope that this you will bear in mind through your conversations and throughout your discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Labib. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Labib.
I will give, it's a pleasure to Ms. Ivana Klimpuch, who came all the way from Kiev to testify about the situation in Ukraine. Ivana.
Thank you, dear Chair, dear Ms. Marker, dear Madam Minister, distinguished colleagues. It's a great privilege and honor to address you at this Inter-Parliamentary Conference, and I am grateful to Belgian Presidency for putting the spotlight on this important existential issue for Ukraine, but I also think it is existential for the European Union and for Europe as such. And maybe I should start from, correcting Madam Minister. We are entering the 11th year of the war. It's not the 3rd year of the war. And I wanted to address you when I was thinking, what should I start with? I decided to cite a text message that one of my colleagues, my friends, a civilian Ukrainian analyst who decided to take the weapons back on the 24th of February of 2022, has just recently written to me. He said, you know, Ivanka, you do have a possibility to reach out to Western partners, so I'll allow myself to share some observations. Let's say in one artillery brigade, Soviet type of self-propelled artillery pieces are not firing because the unit is starving of shells. Foreign artillery pieces are prepared to fire only several thousands of rounds, after which their precision fails. For comparison, back in 2015, when we had the most intensive fights in Debaltsevo, we were firing 500 rounds per day. Now, my colleagues are happy when they are getting at least 80 per several days. So this is for you to understand that we are starving of munitions. We are starving of the need to get more weaponry every single day in order to be able to protect ourselves. And at the same time, all of this on the front line is happening on the backdrop of the every other day Ukrainians mourning their civilian victims across the country. As you have just recently seen in Odessa, 5 children, five children, 4 months old, 8 months old, 2 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, were found under the debris of the residential building where they were sleeping with their parents when the Russian-fired Iranian drone stopped their lives. So this is our everyday reality that we are living in Europe. We are living this through in Europe that has had the luxury of having a peaceful time of almost 4 generations. And may I say so, colleagues, that we have been all spoiled by a certain level of security. But at this particular moment, I think we should not be making the mistake only of talking, discussing, and debating how to support Ukraine. Because it is about support to every single one of us. It is about support to ourselves. It is about support to Western civilization and defending all Europe. And this is the war against the autocracies, against the axis of evil, where Russia has decided just to take the military leadership at this particular moment. Yes, we do know that Russia wants to subjugate Ukraine, that Russia wants to ensure that Ukraine is capitulating, or at least Russia gets the part of the Ukrainian territory. But all of those who are right now already discussing the possibility of negotiations with Russia should not be forgetting that Kremlin has violated almost all significant agreements, both with Ukraine or with NATO or with European Union, and there's no assurances that even if Russia gets what it wants at this particular stage, it will subsequently not endeavor to physically occupy other territories or be emboldened to use force elsewhere. So, in order to survive, we Ukrainians do have to continue fighting. In order to have the choice, the freedom of choice, the possibility to develop a free, prosperous European democratic nation. But there is no country in the world that would be able to withhold the pressure from Russian Federation and from its allies or its partners, from Iran to North Korea to others, alone. So we need you to back us in our effort. And the Russian theory of victory is plausible only if Ukraine's international partners fail to properly resource and train Ukrainian armed forces. And that's why being immensely, wholeheartedly grateful to everything that you have already delivered, to everything that you have already done, we are definitely seeing the great changes in Europe. We are seeing how there is even probably a positive competition of who gets more support to Ukraine, but at the same time, we are still all together following a very conservative, if I may say so, narrative that it is a Ukraine's war. But it is in our common interest that Ukraine wins this war and that Russia does experience a strategic defeat during this war, and only that will provide for our security. Putin is using all the time strategic ambiguity in this war. Will he or will not he use the nuclear weapons? Will he or will not attack any NATO country? Will he or not unfreeze the Transnistrian hotspot? And unfortunately, we all together are answering with a strategic transparency. I think it is time to also exercise some strategic ambiguity, that he would be pushed to think that the West finally does have the political will to react even stronger with the support to Ukraine. Unfortunately, Russian Federation is already fighting the Third World War. And it is fighting not only in Ukraine and not only with military means, but also using hybrid means in Ukraine, in Syria, in Africa, in your own territories, through cyber, through information, through subversive attacks and subversive activities. And we, at the same time, all still believe that this is just a Ukrainian war. Unfortunately, it is not. So we together, we are right now fighting against the man with the axe, but we are responding with a sword and following a very noble, rules of this duel. But that's not how Russia is fighting this war. So when they are torturing our citizens on the occupied territories, when they are turning our lively cities into piles of debris, when they are turning our fertile land into desert, when they are killing our children, our babies, when they are attacking Ukrainian citizens living, just going around about their own lives, many in the West still think that maybe it's not the time that their weapons can be used against legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation. Many still believe that, that maybe not that many instruments have to be given to Ukraine in order to shield itself and European security from this Russian attack. I think that Putin's address in February has actually, in the State Duma, was actually about giving the message to the West that it is the war that he is going to fight with the West and continue fighting with the West. While domestically he explained the need to build a state which is an army state where man's mission will be to die and women's mission will be just to give babies birth, that they would become a cannon fodder. So what else does have Russia do? What else is needed to be experienced in order for all of us to understand that this is our common war and our common victory is needed? So several things are needed from our side, and I will just not get tired of reiterating. The best humanitarian aid to Ukraine is weapons. Please do continue providing weapons to Ukraine. Already yesterday, in much bigger qualities and quantities than you have been doing up till now. We are grateful for everything that has been delivered, but it's not the time to sit and rest on laurels. It is time to ensure that your common production, your common purchasing, your common procurement is upscaled in order to provide Ukrainians with munitions, with air defense possibilities, with weapons, with tanks, with all the instruments that would allow us to stop Russia. Wars are being won by sustainable economies. And that's why we are grateful for the decision on the European Union to approve of the Ukraine facility of 50 billion, because yes, we are trying to use all of our resources and revenues to provide for our security and defense, but we do have to cover other needs of Ukraine so that Ukraine would not become a failed state, as Russian Federation would like to see it happening. And a few more things to round up, dear colleagues. Russian so-called presidential elections are a profanation. And I think we all have to make an effort to ensure that we are not recognizing these elections by the democratic world. We have to make sure that Putin is becoming illegitimate, and he has to become toxic across not only Europe, but also in the global south. I totally agree with Mark that not only proceeds from Russian assets, but the assets themselves have to be transferred to Ukraine, because it is not about violation of the right of ownership. It is not about discreditation of the legal system. It is about justice. Can you imagine that Churchill would think and would debate whether he should or should not use the Nazi Germany assets in order for needs of Britain during the war? I don't think so. So, and last, almost last, we do have to find a consensus on Russian defeat in this particular war. And what is it? And it's not only about borders of Ukraine of 1991. It is about financial, technological impossibility of any Russian aggression across the world. And we have to overcome the fear that inflicting a clear and decisive Russian defeat is a danger for anyone in this room or for anyone in the globe. And last but not the least, Hillary Clinton in Davos, she has said that we don't want to accept what our eyes see, while we have to correspond to realities. And I think that that's the biggest challenge we see today. We have the reality, we have our perception of reality, and we have our actions on the reality that do not match. So we need to ensure that all these three components are getting together in one puzzle, and only then we can ensure that Ukraine, being free, democratic European nation, part of EU, part of NATO, will be a guarantee of your own security, and that you will manage to go through this war paying exclusively by weapons and money, and not by your own lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. And last but not least, I'd like to ask Mr. Gert-Jan Koopman, Director General for Neighbourhood and Enlargement Negotiations, the European Commission, to take the floor, please.
I'm sorry, I had to go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, honourable members, it's a pleasure and a privilege to speak here at this conference on a subject which, of course, is right at the centre of, I think, every citizen's concerns here in the EU these days, and has also dominated policy making in the past 2 years, rightly so. Now, the Minister and Ivana have spoken a lot about the war and the need to win the war, to not be naive, and to ensure that Ukraine has sufficient weapons at its disposal to win the war. Those weapons would have to come from the West. Financial support for equipping Ukraine's military is absolutely indispensable, and I have little to add to that. I would like to concentrate not on winning the war, even if that is the immediate priority, but on winning the peace. And I think there is a link between winning the peace and winning the war, which we are debating in the EU, and I would like to zoom in on that a little bit. One very obvious link is the one to which the Minister has already referred, and everyone on the panel, namely the Ukraine facility, the 50 billion euros fund that the EU has set up to essentially support the Ukrainian economy until the end of 2027. That's essential because without a functioning economy, without economic growth, without returning to levels of prosperity seen before the Russian invasion, it's very hard to see how the country could sustain the war, could sustain recovery after the war, the war ends. And therefore, without economic recovery, the war will simply not be won durably. So that is a very important link, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. The second anchor is the accession process. It's quite impressive to note that Ukraine applied for EU membership literally days after the brutal invasion started in February 2022. And it's equally, I think, worth recalling that the EU decided to grant candidate status to Ukraine literally months after this request was submitted in June of 2022. Now, the accession process is so important because it puts Ukraine's economy and society on a course towards integration that ultimately gives a perspective on gaining the same way of living, standards of living, and economic prowess that we have become so used to in the West. I think Ivana has rightly talked about how we have lulled ourselves maybe into a degree of comfort when it comes to the security threats. But equally, I would say we have forgotten that the EU, despite all of the challenges we face domestically, the challenges our citizens face, is economically a superpower, and that belonging to the EU is the best hope for acceding countries to find economic stability and to find the possibility to integrate in a bloc whose way of life, whose values are vastly more attractive to citizens across the globe than many of us living in the bloc believe. So I was very touched and impressed when I heard the Ukrainian leadership say that the decision that was taken last year in December by the European Council to open accession negotiations was not just important structurally in the long run for the reasons I mentioned, but actually sent a message of motivation to the soldiers fighting in the front line. And that's another illustration how the long-term perspective, winning the peace as I call it, is directly relevant to winning the war. So let me zoom in a bit on these two crucial elements of the longer-term development, starting with economic recovery. We all know that Ukraine lost about a quarter of its economy in 2022 on account of the brutal aggression, and that had a huge impact, obviously, on the country. Significant support was made available by the West to at least ensure that basic social services could be paid and that the economy could continue to function. Last year, the EU made available 18 billion euros in macro-financial assistance to Ukraine, which together with a sizable contribution from the US and a IMF program helped stabilize public finances, helped stabilize the economy. And it is interesting to note that last year, the fastest growing economy in the European on the European continent was actually Ukraine. It grew by more than 5%. So whilst this is of course to a large extent down to the economic support through this budgetary influx, nevertheless it shows that the country is stabilizing, and that is hopeful. However, the damage done to the country is stupendous. World Bank estimates indicate that losses exceed $300 billion, and reconstruction therefore will be a generational endeavor. And this is where the efforts by the international community to coordinate reconstruction work in the context of a G7 donor coordination platform is so important. This is also where the Ukraine facility comes into play, because it isn't just about providing budget support to the government. It's also aimed at providing guarantees and stimulus to private sector investment to ensure that the country can regain its economic prowess and grow faster. It is the largest ever financial envelope set aside for a third country. And when I say third country, of course, I'm wrong, because, as I said, the country has been given not just candidate status, but the decision to open negotiations was taken before this decision was taken to provide the 50 billion euros. So there's a very strong economic anchor. It comes with important reforms, because becoming a member of the EU and putting the economy on a better, more solid basis requires deep reforms. And I'm not just talking about the fight against corruption, the need to make the judicial system more robust, but I'm also talking about essentially providing the economic rulebook that characterizes our own economies in the EU 27, that allows the internal market to function, and that would help Ukraine to grow much faster by integrating in that internal market. So the Ukraine facility seeks also to ensure that Ukraine will undertake those reforms, and some of the payments under this facility will be conditional on delivering those reforms. We are eagerly awaiting an economic plan which Ukraine has developed with our assistance, and which is near final, called the Ukraine Plan, which will be their polar North Star to ensure that these reforms are anchored in a strategic endeavor. This plan will form the basis for the disbursements under the facility in the longer run, but we will already this month pay out 4.5 billion euros under the facility in bridge financing. Now, it is clear that with what is happening in the US, challenges remain very significant, and therefore the work that we are undertaking together with other donors to find sufficient support remains very important. We are winning the peace, but we haven't yet won the peace. On enlargement, as I mentioned, a momentous decision to open negotiations. I would like to add that that decision was, of course, incredibly important from a geostrategical, geopolitical perspective. But I should underline that that decision was also really justified on the basis of merit. In other words, on the basis of the reforms which Ukraine itself undertook. We set out back in June 2022 7 conditions to essentially guide the process of enlargement. And by December, Ukraine had largely fulfilled those conditions. I work with many enlargement countries, as you can imagine, but there is no enlargement country where the negotiators on the other side will tell you that they have to cut off the discussions online for a bit because there is a rocket attack, they have to go to a shelter, and nevertheless they simply continue to work undisturbedly and with great motivation and commitment. So this is a truly, I would say, historic achievement which the country has earned itself. Now, enlargement is a process. It is not something that is achieved in just a few months or even in 1 or 2 years. It takes time to rewrite what I call the operating system of a country and to align it with the EU. But Ukraine is very motivated, and our duty is to help the country. So we trust that in the course of this year we will be making significant additional headway. And that, of course, already generates benefits for the country, because we have afforded Ukraine access already to parts of the internal market. As you can see these days on the borders of Ukraine, this causes some friction with agricultural workers in other countries. I don't want to comment on the substance of it, but it shows that this access is real. And with the new reforms, with the reforms undertaken to achieve success in the accession process, Ukraine will be able to benefit from these facilities much more. So I would like to conclude on a note of optimism. Ukraine has shown its capacity in the most difficult of circumstances to lay the foundations for winning the peace, and in winning the peace, providing an anchor for winning the war. It's now our duty collectively to support the country and work with it very closely to ensure that this great start actually leads to concrete results in the coming years, and that Ukraine's European future can be anchored through further decisions going forward. So I would like to underline that this is a completely unprecedented situation, but a situation which, despite all the difficulties, we are collectively managing well due to Ukraine's great determination and commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Koopman. We come now to the debate. We have the opportunity to hear from you. We have an extensive speakers list, which we are closing now. Again, we have to insist on the 90 seconds or a minute and a half you are given, so that everybody can speak and we can accommodate all of you. Apologies if I don't pronounce your names always correctly, but I'll do my best. And I follow the list on the screen. And I start with a member of the European Parliament, Mr. Javier Nart.
¿Hablaré en español? ¿Es posible?
I'm going to speak Spanish. In the springtime, we realized that we're living in dreams rather than in reality. This is a war that none of the two sides can win. I think that we have to support Ukraine because our own security is at stake. But at the same time, I believe that we have to use the confiscated assets for the Ukraine. But the big question is, are we ready for reality? That is, are we ready for conflicts such as the one in Georgia with the permanently occupied Ukraine? That is the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sticking to the time. Next speaker is Ms. Ivana Posavec-Krivec from Croatia.
Poštovani predsjedavajući, uvaženi panelisti, kolegice I kolege zastupnici. Honorable Chair, esteemed panelists, dear colleagues, 2 years ago, Russia launched a brutal military invasion of Ukraine. In that war, in which Ukrainians are fighting heroically to defend their homes and their right to freedom and independence, they are also fighting for the security of the whole of Europe. If Ukraine failed in its struggle for freedom, it would completely change the geopolitical relations and increase Russia's appetites for Europe. The comprehensive and strong support for Ukraine is the support for universal values, which are also Europe's values of peace, freedom, security, and respect for international law. In these 2 years, we have witnessed barbaric attacks on Ukrainian cities and civilians. This is something that we in Croatia can actually relate to because we understand the Ukrainian struggle really well. Our memories of the sacrifices made during our war are the reason for our particular empathy with the Ukrainian people. The Croatian Parliament's response was extremely quick. We unanimously adopted the declaration in Ukraine just 1 day after the Russian aggression and sent a timely and strong political message of condemnation of the Russian aggression and reaffirmed our support for the sovereignty of Ukraine. We organized the first parliamentary summit of the International Crimean Platform and the International Donors Conference on Humanitarian Demining of Ukraine. We have to stand by the Ukrainians and be on the right side of the history. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. We turn to Ms. Alexandra Atalides from Cyprus.
Thank you, President. 2 years after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the war is ongoing with catastrophic consequences for Ukraine, Europe, and the world. Ahead of elections in Russia, one should not expect a softening of Putin's position. Therefore, the fact that the Russian regime multiplies its verbal threats against Ukraine and the West, including threats to use nuclear weapons, should not come as a surprise. However, we must remain united and do our utmost to halt Putin and to finally end the war. We must stand firm to protect our values and principles, as well as Ukraine and Europe. We must strengthen even further our support to Ukraine, which is now a candidate for accession. I come from Cyprus, which has suffered an invasion and is still occupied by a third country. I can only express from this position as well my support and solidarity towards the people of Ukraine. In the darkest and most difficult times when a country is under attack, and even shortly after the attack, I know how important it is to feel that international solidarity and support are unconditional and unequivocal. So I want to assure our Ukrainian colleagues and the people of Ukraine that we still care and still stand united in solidarity, and we are glad that in Cyprus we are sheltering many Ukrainian refugees, and we hope to see them return to a free Ukraine soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Atalides. Next is Pavel Fischer from the Czech Republic. Pavel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dear Mark, I have 2 points. First, I would like to praise Belgian presidency for this initiative to freeze and confiscate Russian state assets. I think that this is something extremely important, and we need European solution here. You have our support, and we are ready to provide you the necessary steps on the level of parliaments. My second point goes back to Ms. Els van Hoof remark concerning ammunition artillery initiative by the Czech Republic. I am ready to explain to you, colleagues, what is behind, because I think that, as you know, last month Czech Republic launched an initiative to buy in third countries ammunition for artillery. And we are ready to help our governments to deliver, also on the level of parliaments. We control the governments, but we can also create an international coalition of like-minded. So I think that this is an opportunity to seize, and I am at your disposal today and tomorrow to think about how to help our governments to take necessary steps and to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pavel. Next speaker, we go to Denmark, Teresa Scavenius.
Thank you. I will speak against using the confiscated assets because it may escalate the war and it may be seen as a provocation, but first of all, it may also undermine the global institutional order we are actually fighting for and which we are mostly needed. And I'm also afraid that we are starting a permanent state of war with Russia, where it's not easy to come, where there's no peace we can expect. The whole rhetoric and the political attitude will leave no room for a future with peace. I think it's a really dangerous strategy because we know Russia will not be won by weapons. We can build stronger ammunition forces, we can speak the language of war, but Europe will need to have a peaceful collaboration with Russia after the war. So what do we need to do? I would really encourage everybody to have a stronger diplomatic attitude, rhetoric, and response. There has already been people talking for negotiation tables. We need to find political solution and request that we are not undermining the whole situation or the institutional network we are building upon. We see it also in the Arctic Council, for example, where they try to maintain collaboration to some extent in order to prepare for an after-war situation. If Russia is isolated, excluded from everything, and if we start using confiscated assets, it will get even worse to have or to win the war, as it was said before. So I think we should think in the after-war logic and see Europe as a way of requesting that.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Grigore Kalev-Stoichescu from Estonia.
Thank you. Russia must be made responsible for the horrific war crimes it has committed. from Putin to the butchers there on the ground in Ukraine. The whole chain is responsible for this and for destruction that it has caused to Ukraine. Russia may be stopped by both supplying Ukraine with more and more powerful weapons and by weakening Russia economically to the point from where it cannot sustain its war effort at this scale. Europe has fed this horrible monster, Putin's criminal regime, for many years, and it still does, even though much less. Those who continue to buy Russian gas, please remind yourself that this gas is soaked in Ukrainian blood. Russia must be starved of cash and dual technologies and components for its war industry. We have no other choice. The only measure of how efficient we actually are is to assess Russia's revenues, especially from its continued business with Western companies and also with third countries. So proposal number 1, 0.25% of the GDP of each EU's member states to military aid to Ukraine. Let's do that. Secondly, let's start working with third countries to limit their ability to supply Russia with so-called alternative imports. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ms. Natalia Pouzirev from France.
Merci. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, I'll be speaking in French. Europe has shown a great capacity for unity in the face of Russia's aggression of Ukraine. Now we need to do more to up the antes, to support the Ukraine, but also to guarantee our own collective security. Faced with an increased aggressive attitude of Russia in all fields, physical and virtual. In the short term, we will need to send on more ammunition. That is why there are 8 capacity coalitions that we need to support so that we can manufacture more ammunition, air defense equipment, but also long-range missiles to reach further. On the 26th of February in Paris, an international conference to support Ukraine was organized. A consensus could be found on 5 avenues of action, because we need to change tack and not to exclude anything. It doesn't mean that we should send our own forces on the field, but we could be more offensive when it comes to cyber defense. We need to co-design and co-manufacture armament in Ukraine, to better support our armaments in the Ukraine, to support other countries that might be under threat, such as Moldova. I'd like to support all capacity-based initiatives, just like the one conducted by the Czech government. We need to source and buy more ammunition from third countries. So thank you very much for the first Prime Minister in Estonia when she mentioned the creation of this new support fund. So I'm calling for more solidarity towards victory and long-term stability. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Jukka Kopra from Finland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We fully support Ukraine's fight against Russia's unprovoked aggression, and Ukraine needs our help to beat Russia and win the war. Now, we need also a more pragmatic approach into this question. I think that we have been discussing these same matters for a long time, but maybe we should take more action. And one key point that is in my mind as the question is the role of the European Union's European Investment Bank. As far as I know, that the bank's rules forbid it to finance projects that deal with armaments industry, because arms industry is not considered a sustainable industry in the taxonomy and ESG criteria. Now, I believe that the European Parliament has made a move in this matter, but I'm wondering what is the general situation considering European Investment Bank's role and ability to finance defense industry. Perhaps our distinguished members of European Parliament that are present here could answer this question and tell us how would we proceed in this matter to sort of release the funding for defense industries in Europe to provide more ammo for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Jukka. Next is Mr. Markus Faber from Germany.
Yes, thank you. And dear colleagues, we are meeting here under the European flag, and the European Union has pledged solidarity with Ukraine. But right now, I think not everybody has a solidarity for Ukraine yet here. Germany is very strong when it comes to economic terms, and right now we're delivering half of the military aid to Ukraine, and I think this is a good thing. We have moved quite a bit over here. But then this solidarity should come from every country, not just Germany and other countries that are moving forward, such as the Czech Republic or Denmark. But it should come from all parts of the European Union, from the beautiful shores of Ireland, also to the beautiful mountains of Austria. And I think we can just win this together when we also have these discussions in our countries. And these discussions are not pleasant, but they have to be made. And I think we have to go a bit forward here to have a more common approach and not pledge our solidarity to Ukraine over here and then go home and not having everybody on board. And to my colleague from Denmark, I would like to add that these negotiations are taking part. They are taking part at the battlefield right now, every day. And you can go there and join them. And you can go with me to the mass graves in Liman, and you can go with me to the torture prisons in Kherson. And then you can find out that there's no negotiation with the invasion troops. The war will be over when the soldiers of those troops go home. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Stefanos Kikas from Greece. Stefanos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear ministers, dear colleagues. The European Union has pledged a long-standing commitment towards Ukraine. We are collectively committed to a comprehensive and long-term support covering security and defense, as well as economic stability, resilience, reconstruction, and financial and reform assistance. Greece's commitment to a long-term support towards Ukraine remains firm on all levels: political, financial, military, and humanitarian. Greece supports Kiev's aspiration to organize a peace summit as a first step for building a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. A broad international coalition can be built around the concept of protecting and preserving the UN Charter and its fundamental principles, and the willingness to uphold core principles of international law, such as territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of all states. Furthermore, Greece continues to provide the port of Alexandroupolis as a hub for the dispatch of allied aid, highlighting a distinct geopolitical importance not only for Ukraine, but also for the entire eastern flank of NATO. Alexandroupolis will soon constitute a new gateway for natural gas, covering the needs for many countries in the region and therefore increase their resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Richard Scholes from Latvia. Richard, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. First, I need to respond to our Denmark colleague. I know very well the Chair, Mr. Jensen, who is, for obvious reasons, I guess, is not present here. Therefore, this lady is being appointed as the head of the delegation. And just to be clear, we're here, we do not represent firsthand our political parties, but our countries. And I know for sure Denmark is a rock-solid supporter of Ukraine. And what was said by the head of the delegation from Denmark, that's a disgrace, absolutely, and it doesn't fit Denmark's. I'm no Danish, but I know what is Denmark's position on that, and it doesn't correspond to what the lady said. What I wanted to actually raise here is one thing that we do manage at the EU level, provide support to Ukraine. Now it's really to deliver on ammunition, weapons. But one thing that we could do here is actually exchange the best practices that we are doing. For example, Latvia, we just recently seized the Moscow house, the Moscow property. I call all the EU member states to do the same. I just looked up in the center of Brussels, there's a huge mansion that is Moscow House that should be seized, sold, auctioned, and the finances being given to Ukraine, that Ukraine could purchase weapons. Then the second one, we have the AML, where we seize the criminally gained funds That money should not be put in our central budgets, but be given directly to Ukraine so they have the means to buy the weapons, what they need right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Next is Mr. Laurinas Kaskionas, sorry for the pronunciation, from Lithuania.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Latest Putin's interview shows us that the Russian approach towards Ukrainians are genocidal. It's simple two-way debate. If you can become a Russian or you be tortured and destroyed. That's why our aim and our challenge is just to help Ukrainians to fight, because it's an existential fight. And I think what we need to say and to bring on our table is a French President Macron initiative. I think it's interesting, at least needs to be discussed, deserve to be discussed. Why I'm saying so? This idea of training mission in Ukraine could create such called strategic ambiguity, which we lack during these 2 years, because they always said what we will not do instead what we say what we can possibly do. So thinking in this direction, President Macron is very right. So I think we should go further and to think about possible modalities. But of course, we should also close the gap between strategies and the reality. Now reality in Ukraine is survival. We need more weapons and more ammunition. And when somebody calls to talk about post-war Europe, don't forget, if it will not help, it could be post-war Europe without Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass the floor to Mr. Fernand Kartheiser from Luxembourg.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. President. The irresponsible idea to send Western troops into Ukraine could transform this war into a generalized conflict. One should condemn every initiative making things worse, every logic of war, and every attempt to implicate even more our countries into this conflict. Those who really want to help Ukraine, help save human lives and maintain the integrity of Ukrainian territory, they have but one choice: encourage negotiating a peace agreement with Russia as rapidly as possible. Europe once more failed to define its proper interests, so give priority to adherence rather than to reflection. Europe must indeed have good ties with the US, but also with Russia. We should come back to a pan-European security architecture with all countries, including, of course, Russia and Ukraine. A new arms race is not necessary, and Ukraine will be able to join the European Union, but will be never able to join NATO. Thank you.
Merci. Next is Mr. Bogdan Klic from Poland.
Thank you. Do you remember, dear colleagues, 2 years ago when we decided to support strongly and unanimously fighting Ukraine? We've been doing the same since then, and I hope that unanimously we will support Ukraine as the major anchor of this support within the European Union. That's why let me reiterate that Ukraine cannot lose, because otherwise it would bring a full-scale war to our territory, to the territory of the European Union. Europeans must therefore understand that Ukraine's struggle is our struggle, and the crucial, absolutely crucial and decisive element and reason for the future of the global security. That's why Europe must supply the front line with everything that fighting Ukrainians need: military, economic, political, and humanitarian aid. I will repeat, everything necessary, including long-range missiles and of course ammunition. We have to meet this goal. This is the best investment in our European security, and we must not give in to Russian blackmail, including nuclear blackmail, because that will be a sign of our weakness. Europeans must understand that if Ukraine fails, our treaty territory will be the immediate front line, when now we are the second line. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Next is Mr. Titus Corlatian from Romania, please.
Thank you, colleagues. Wishing, first of all, success to the Belgian presidency of the EU Council, but also welcoming Sweden in our Euro-Atlantic family. I will not develop our national experience in Romania while showing strong and serious support to Ukraine through different means, but also to the Republic of Moldova because there is a need, nor to our management on the very serious challenges coming sometimes day by day from the Russian aggression against even the Romanian territory directly, which is a NATO territory. But I will raise very briefly two items which are important for both Ukraine and for us. First of all, on the accountability for the crime of aggression, I will raise once again the need, and this is an encouragement for all the EU member states, to show serious and concrete political and legal contribution for the decisive advancement of the process for the establishment of an international jurisdiction for punishing the crime of aggression. If we want to reject the impunity, if we want to be back to the multilateralism, that means the functioning of the international society based on rules, and to underline the accountability for the crime of aggression, we need to advance seriously and fast in this direction. Deuxièmement, c'est plutôt...
Secondly, I appeal here to the national parliaments who are also members of the Council of Europe to finalize signing the partial and widened agreement where we have a list of damages to be paid, which is very important for reconstructing Ukraine and for all of us.
I gladly pass the floor to Mr. Aron Emilsson from Sweden.
Thank you, Chair, and Excellencies, esteemed colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for your solid and firm support for the Swedish NATO ratification during our process. And I would also like to echo my friend Rihard Kohl's intervention when I think it's reflecting the Nordic-Baltic position when it comes to the importance of a Russian defeat and military assistance towards Ukraine. It's in all our interest to speed up our solid, firm and resolute support for Ukraine. Ukraine is the front line for the rules-based security order, the self-determination, freedom and the Western values that we all are defending. And I think the principles and figures in our beautiful speeches also needs to be transformed into action in many ways. And just to mention some core and crucial matters lays ahead of us. Let's strengthen our common efforts to produce a higher amount of ammunition and military equipment to be able to assist Ukraine, of course, in the short term, but also to be able to assist ourselves and reset our stockpiles for the long term and long windows of opportunity. All of us that should contribute to the air defense of Ukraine, that's crucial. Let's remember the words of Montgomery when it comes to that the one controls the air also controls a lot of the possibilities to winning the actual war. We need to address and fight the circumventions of sanctions towards Russia, where the war economy is quite prosperous. And all of us need to increase our own defense budgets and investments to our defense industry. That's also crucial for the long run. And to, of course,
time's up.
Also address our American counterparts, the need for their support in our common defense for the Western values and democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Irakli Beraya, our friends from Georgia.
Thank you, Chair. I want to reiterate our strong support to sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and solidarity with its brave people defending their country from Russian aggressors. This brutal war is not an isolated case, but a clear attempt to redraw sovereign borders by force and to undermine rules-based international order. It is the continuation of Russia's full-scale aggression against Georgia in 2008 and the result of the failure of the international community to hold the aggressor accountable back at that time. As Russia wages war against Ukraine, 20% of my country still remains occupied, with the situation in occupied regions noticeably worsening. Illegal military presence and borderization, killings and human rights violations, de facto annexation steps, and various manifestations of hybrid warfare are daily consequences of Russian occupation. All that, along with the intention to build a naval base on our seacoast, is a serious threat to European security. This is why, dear friends, that when pressuring Russia to withdraw from Ukraine, it is equally important that the deoccupation of Georgia and the implementation of EU-mediated ceasefire agreement remain top priority on European agenda. Full-fledged European security will not be achieved if a single Russian soldier remains on the Georgian soil. But apart from pressuring Russia to withdraw, it's equally important to further step up support for strengthening our defense and resilience against full spectrum of threats and increase EU and NATO engagement in the Black Sea region, given its strategic importance for European security. My country has been resolutely pursuing peaceful conflict resolution policy, ambitious democratic security, as well as EU and NATO integration agenda. And as devoted security partner and now a candidate country, it remains committed to strengthening peace and security in the region and beyond, and to work closely with EU on the implementation of common goals and priorities identified in the strategic compass. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we go to Moldova. Mr. Radu Marian, please.
Thank you so much for inviting us at this timely discussion on European security on the parliamentary platform. We would like to echo what our Ukrainian colleagues referred to, and we call on continuing support for Ukraine. Any help that EU provides to Ukraine, it also helps Moldova. Ukraine protects us militarily, but also Moldova faces hybrid threats from the Kremlin. We have propaganda and fake news and stage protests. We have a process of, of undermining elections from the Kremlin. We had recent local elections where they spend millions of dollars trying to bribe voters and officials. They're trying to stir up problems in Transnistrian region. We've had a very recent so-called Congress in Transnistria where they launched a rumor that Russia will accept Transnistria's request for annexation. This was a propaganda event trying to create tension and panic. The rumor did not materialize. We are taking measures to ensure peace and stability in the Transnistrian region, including through our enlargement process. But we need further EU support, that is continuing cooperation within the European security, continued EU peace facility, building resilience through EU PM, further support in adopting sanctions against those who destabilize our Moldovan democracy, and accelerated process of EU negotiation process while we commit to do our homework. And last, what I want to mention is that all the measures that EU takes to support Moldovan democracy and EU integration process, they crucially support Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Christian Tybring-Gjedde from Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Russia bears the full responsibility for having brought European security into the most severe situation in decades. Norway condemns the continued Russian aggression in the strongest possible terms. Aggression against sovereign neighbors cannot go unstopped. Appeasing the aggressor only leads to a short-time result and only feeds and allows further aggression in the longer run, as history repeatedly has shown. Mr. Chair, Europe is burning. It is time for us to step up to the plate. As a consequence, I will encourage all countries gathered here to stop money transfer to countries who actively or passively support Russia's war. If we are serious about winning this war, we cannot discuss other matters with Putin's friends as nothing is happening in Europe. Mr. Chair, friends of my enemy are also my enemy. And at the end, Mr. President, as a short reminder, we need to include the effects of artificial intelligence in all our defense capabilities. It will change the way war will be conducted in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Hulusi Akar from Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very shortly, first of all, I'd like to underline that Turkey condemns Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and strongly supports Ukraine in its struggle to restore the sovereignty and the territorial integrity since 2014. Turkey was the first country to legally and officially declare the situation as a war by closing the Turkish straits to Russian naval vessels, preventing a potential escalation in the Black Sea, and still closed. Turkey supports Zelensky's peace plan in principle and is ready to host again peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Turkey has also engaged politically and diplomatically, including by facilitating direct talks, working for the exchange of prisoners, the escalation ceasefire channels to end the war and the Ukrainian grain export, and providing crucial and strong military assistance to Ukraine. We will continue to work to prevent the war from spilling over into the Black Sea. Meanwhile, Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania have signed an agreement on establishing a joint task force to counter drifting sea mines in the Black Sea. We are looking into the possibility of reviving the Black Sea Grain Initiative in a renewed security framework that will enable safe commercial shipping at sea. Turkey is also ready to contribute to fast recovery and the reconstruction of Ukraine. The European Peace Facility for Ukraine should also include NATO allies, especially NATO ally and EU candidate Turkey. In view of this, it will not be fair and reasonable to exclude EU candidate and NATO ally Turkey from the Ukraine regulation and the European Peace Facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Marko Mikkelsen from Estonia, the floor is yours.
The Ukraine crisis is not territorial conflict and not an attempt to establish regional geopolitical balance. The issue is much broader and more fundamental and is about the principles underlying the new international order. These are words of war criminal Vladimir Putin said just last October in 2023. I fully agree with what dear friend Ivana said earlier in her remarks, that this is war not only about Ukraine, but about us. And actually Russia considers, that Putin himself considers, being in broader conflict with the Western world in order to reshape world order. I spent last week 3 days in front lines, and I witnessed with my own eyes how critical is the situation. There is a lack of ammunition, there is a lack of weaponry, and actually if we are not getting ready to send everything what we have at the moment, we might witness very bad news from Ukraine, and these news are not bad only for Ukraine, but for all of us. So if we would like to establish peace, like some of our colleagues speaking right now, we have to bring this war to the end in a way that Russia is strategically defeated. And for that, we have to ramp up every possibility what we can have in our stocks and send to Ukraine immediately. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I pass the floor to Ms. Sarah Nani from Germany. Sarah.
I will talk in German. Hello.
Every joint action starts with the joint situational awareness. In 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, we didn't have that. We were not united in Europe, especially Germany did not take the Baltic states and Poland seriously with their estimate of Russia. But that's different now. We are much more unified, north to west and east to north, south, and east to west. But we've also heard that, and we heard these voices again today, that some people think that we can just solve this with diplomacy and that Russia is only interested in Ukraine. And I would like to state this very clearly. These voices in our own countries are sometimes sponsored by Moscow. Sometimes it's just politics, but in both cases, it is to our own security disadvantage in Europe, and therefore I would like to appeal to all the European-minded colleagues here. We are ahead of a European election campaign, and please let's have a fair election campaign, and let's remain focused on
what should keep us united, keep focused and carry on united.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Vassilios Ypsilantis from Greece.
Thank you, dear Chair, distinguished colleagues. A few additional words on the speech of our Chair, Mr. Giga's speech. First, Greece has supported the establishment of the Ukraine facility with a total budget of 50 billion euros for the year 2024 to 2027 in order to secure a predictable, long-term and sustainable funding in Ukraine needs. Second, Greece has joined a declaration of support for Ukraine of the G7 leaders for the security commitments to Ukraine on the point of providing sustained and long-term military training. We train Ukraine pilots in the use of F-16 fighter jets. Surely Ukraine needs more for its freedom, which means freedom in the whole civilized democratic countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then I will give the floor to Mr. David McAllister because there was a specific question to the European Parliament. But last on the speakers list is Ms. Dovile Sakaliene from Lithuania.
Thank you. You know, the hard truth is that we are too slow. And the hard truth is that Russia is quickly readapting and is regenerating its military force. And despite heavy losses, Russian manpower in Ukraine is even increasing. For example, from 455,000 in November 2023 to 466,000 in January 2024. And on top of that, potential addition of half a million mobilization in the nearest future. And let me remind you that Russia has 30 million men in reserve, and they can train 130,000 every 6 months. And plus to that, Russia has a solid influx of finances. Only from China, we get $500 million every single day for the energy sales. And when we look at their economic growth, it continues to grow. Actually, in 2023, Russian economy grew faster than all the G7 economies. And the growth forecast is twice as fast as it was expected in October 2023. And when we talk even about Russian banks, the profits in 2023 were 16 times up. So for that is a very hard lesson. We are too slow. We are still stuck in our bureaucracy. We still have not found a way to use $300 billion of Russian money for Ukraine. And our defense industry needs to actually start working in the war economy mode, because we are talking about war, but we are still living in peacetime, whereas Russia is living in wartime and is not going to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was one specific question for you, David, so I'll pass the floor to you.
Right, thank you, Mark, for giving me the floor. Our Finnish colleague, Jukka Kopra, was asking to change the statute of the European Investment Bank. I just wanted to briefly answer. Pursuant to Article 308 of the Treaty on the European Union, the statute may be amended by the Council, acting unanimously in accordance with a special legislative procedure. So the initiative here is with the European Investment Bank, and the European Parliament would be consulted. We have in the meantime, and that's good news, called for proposals to change the statutes of the European Investment Bank in our latest report on the implementation of the CSDP, just adopted last week in Strasbourg. It says in paragraph 29, the European Parliament calls for improving defense financing for exploring a potential reform of the European Investment Bank's lending policy. The European Parliament calls for the strengthening of the industry's access to private funding to ensure that the European defense industry has sufficient access to public and private finance and investment on a sustainable basis. So that is the call of the European Parliament. The European Investment Bank, as I am informed, is working on this proposal, and they will come back to us, I guess, in the next 2 months. The new EIB President, Nadia Calviño, has made remarks accordingly to this. So I think we're working on this, and thanks for the good question.
Thank you so much. We conclude our debate here too. Thank you for all the contributions, and I sense quite an overwhelming consensus on the need to further support Ukraine, but I'll leave it to our distinguished guests to wrap it up for a couple of minutes. Ivana, can you start?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues, for all your actions and words of support that we've heard today. And maybe just a few reflections. You know, there is no other nation in the world that wants peace more than we Ukrainians do. And I think that that has to be understood. It's not that we want to go on fighting, but it's hard to get to any negotiations with someone who does not accept the mere fact that you exist, who denies you of the very possibility that you are a citizen and of Ukrainian nationality in the country that is defined with the internationally recognized borders. So, therefore, the diplomatic negotiations with someone who is a war criminal, who is a liar, who is a dictator, and who wants to change totally the rules-based order, that's pretty difficult. And therefore, only through the common unity, force, and strength, the arguments could be well delivered to Russian Federation. Moreover, this is not the war of Putin. This is war of Russian Federation. Don't be misled. And our common weakness, our hesitation, our delays in military provisions to Ukraine, our fear, our caution, all of that is just feeding the beast. So therefore, in order to stop this war, we have to be resolute as Ukrainian brave armed forces. We have to be resolute as Ukrainian society. We have to ensure that all our common resources are put to protect something that you've been enjoying for many generations and have been taking that for granted. Don't be misled. If Ukraine falls, there will be other victims and other attacks by the Russian Federation. And one more thing that I wanted to mention. Back in 2014, and I insist, this war is ongoing 10 years already, we were a neutral state, non-bloc, non-aligned. That did not preclude Putin from attacking us. That did not preclude Putin from telling the lies to the world that it is about NATO expansion. He has easily swallowed the Finnish and Swedish joining NATO, and that only made your NATO security stronger. So I'm sure that without Ukraine winning this war, without Russia being defeated, without Ukraine being a member of NATO and the EU, Europe cannot count on its sustainable and long-lasting security. So it's up to you to decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivana. And to conclude, Mr. Koopman.
Thank you very much. I've listened attentively to what I think was a debate with a lot of support for Ukraine, a lot of support for the efforts that the EU and member states, and indeed, I would say, the free Western world is making to support the country. Zooming out, it seems to me that we have actually been reasonably successful in providing economic support, if we're honest. We have been somewhat less successful in providing military support, even if we have stepped up to the plate there as well. And now clearly the message that emanates for me from this debate is that we need to stay the course and that we need to double down and accelerate. That seems clear. There's a lot of people out there who believe that the EU, due to the way it operates, to its institutional features, finds it very hard to contribute to this. And whilst I will not deny that some decision-making has been hard, the decisions have been made. And they have been made overwhelmingly in good time. We need to capitalize on that. I think, as Ivana said, ultimately It's not down to the EU institutions, it's down to the parliaments of our member states, it's down to the governments of our member states, it's down to the European Parliament. I think we have shown that we can do this in the past. We now need to accelerate, and ultimately the choice is for all of us in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, best friends. It was a pleasure to chair this session. We will resume our work shortly with another session dedicated to the process of enlargement of the European Union. Just a couple of minutes.